How many of you ever wrestled with this? Because I have in my own spiritual life, where I approach spirituality and I approach God, and God says, I want you to experience the fullness of life, and I want you to have the best of what this life has to offer. And so we come to church and we do the church routine, and we're searching and all these things. And if we read our Bible enough, and if we pray enough, and if we come to church enough, and if I sing loud enough, and maybe if I sit in the front row, then maybe somehow I'm going to achieve spiritual success. Maybe I'm going to accomplish something spiritually, and I'll be a great Christian, and people will look up to me, and I can be a leader, or I can gain and I can acquire some spiritual knowledge that's totally going to change everything, and suddenly I'm going to reach this place of contentment and fulfillment. Sounds eerily similar to the world's way of living. We've just simply put in a nice spiritual packaging on it. And so it's still all about me, right? I come to church, and I'll be the first to admit, man, it's hard not to live your life this way, because we're selfish by nature, and our tendency as human beings is to want to put ourselves at the center of the universe. So you can go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and that's what happened with Adam and Eve. When they ate that apple, they thought God was holding out on them. Who's he to tell me I can't eat this apple? Right? I want to be in control. I'm at the center of the universe. I make decisions for myself. And so it's this subtle sort of thing where I'm still at the center of the universe, and my spirituality is still all about me and what I can acquire from God, what I can achieve, what I can accomplish, how do I become. And we're left in the very same state of being completely unfulfilled. It's never enough. How many of you ever reach a point where you're like, okay, I read my Bible enough now. I'm good. I'm a good Christian. No, we're always left like, man, no matter how much I do it, I feel like I don't do it enough, right? Because we're missing the whole point. See, when you're at the center of the universe, it's all about you. And the fundamental issue is it's not all about you. It's about God. It's about Him. And when we take ourselves, when we truly take ourselves out of the center of the universe and put God there where He belongs, suddenly my success and my achievements and my accomplishments become totally irrelevant. Because it's not about me, it's about Him. See, when God is at the center of the universe, my identity is not in my own spirituality, but in God Himself. That's where my identity is found. It's in my relationship with Him. It's the intimacy that I have with Him. And I'm convinced that this is the only place where we are ever going to truly find fulfillment in life. When we learn this and we practice this. When our identity is not wrapped up in us and what we do and what we don't do, but it's wrapped up completely in Him. Now I know, and I just want to say also, I know the pushback to this is often, well, if our spiritual accomplishments become irrelevant, then we're simply giving people an excuse to do nothing, aren't we? Like, I don't have to do anything anymore. It's not about what I do or don't do, and so we're simply giving people an excuse to do nothing. My response is that if we're genuinely pursuing a life of God at the center, if we're genuinely pursuing a life of falling madly in love with Jesus, our lives are going to be so dramatically changed that no one is ever going to have to convince you to do God stuff. We got the whole thing backwards. We're starting with, what do I have to do to achieve this? Rather than just sort of getting there and being there and allowing God to be at the center and allowing that to transform us. Ministry doesn't lead us to God. God leads us to ministry. And so this is not about, don't hear me say for 1 second, this is not about loving God and doing nothing. Because I don't think for 1 second that you can genuinely love God and do nothing. I believe with all my heart that when we put God at the center of our lives and we fall madly in love with Him and our identity becomes wrapped up in Him, we will do more for Him than we ever would otherwise. It's all about how we approach it and the motivation behind why we do what we do. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't do anything for God until we genuinely fall madly in love with Him? Is that it? Not at all. That's not the case. I think sometimes it's the doing things for God. It's in the doing things for God that we find Him, and we fall more and more in love with Him in those moments. So it isn't like this nice, we as human beings, especially in Western culture, we like sort of linear thinking, right? A lot of us like linear thinking. Unless you're a very artistic mind, then you hate linear thinking. But a lot of us like to say, okay, here's point A, here's point B, boom, 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 here's the steps I need to take to get to point B. Give me my checklist, let me check it off, and let me get it done so that I can accomplish what I want to accomplish, right? That's what life's sort of about. That's the way we approach life. That's the way we do things. That's not where it's about. It's about, man, God is in all of this. God is a part of all this. He's a part of me, and there's something much bigger, and it's in that. It's in the recognition that there's something much bigger than me going on, and all I need to do is invest myself wholeheartedly in God and in my relationship with Him, and as that develops, He'll lead me to the things I need to do and don't do, but it's in that we sort of develop this relationship, and it's a lot messier. It's much easier, right, if I have my list and go, okay, had my quiet time today, said my prayers today, went to church Sunday morning, I guess I've done my God duty, right? It's much messier when it's like it's a relational thing and you got to figure out what's going on, and it's this and it's that. But it's only in this place that I think we're going to find the fulfillment we've really been looking for. And so my caution in all of this is simply, we have to be very careful of the subtle temptation to do all the right things for all the wrong reasons. And to, without even knowing it, put ourselves at the center of the universe, basically enthrone ourselves as God. And even our well-intentioned spiritual pursuits are not about God, they're about us. And I promise you, in that place, I'm sure you've all experienced it before, but we'll be left feeling empty because the wrong person's sitting at the center of the universe and at the center of our lives. So our mission, thank you for allowing me to go on that rather long tangent. Let me get back to what we were talking about, but that's important to this discussion. Our mission begins in this place of fulfilling the purpose of Jesus, to help people truly experience the fullness of life, because that's what Jesus came, and so our mission begins in that place. We want people to experience the fullness of life that Jesus came to give. But it doesn't end there. Again, we have to remember, as we were just talking about, it's not about me. It's not about simply helping me to fulfill a self-indulgent ambition to feel fulfilled in my life. Fulfillment comes, but that's not what it's about. It's not about simply finding fulfillment. In fact, as crazy as it sounds, until I get to a place where it's not about me, I probably won't truly begin to experience the fullness of life that Jesus offered. This is where Jesus' teachings get confusing, because it's like until we get this, until we live this, it seems so like, wait a second, I take myself out of the picture and then all of a sudden now I'm going to feel fulfilled? How does that work? Because everything in the world tells us it's about you. It's got to be about you, and you've got to go out and get the things you want and pursue the things you want and acquire and get what you can. And we try so hard to live our lives that way, unsuccessfully. So our mission is to help people experience the fullness of life by teaching them to love God with all their heart, to care for others as much as themselves, and to serve Christ in the world with passion and purpose. Again, this goes back to what we were just talking about, that when I take myself out of the center of things and I put God there, when I fall madly in love with Him and begin to love Him with all of me, then I begin to find fulfillment. But it's interesting, let's look for a minute, if you're still in your Bibles there, it's interesting to look at Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 22, sort of where we started. The expert in religious law, he comes to Jesus and he asks Him for what? What does he ask Him for? Go ahead. Yeah, he asks Him for the one greatest commandment in all of the law. What's the one thing, Jesus, that is greatest in all of them? This was a pretty common discussion, actually, amongst the rabbis of that day. And so they come. What's interesting, though, is Jesus responds with what? He responds with 2. The guy comes and says, give me the one greatest commandment. What is it, Jesus? And Jesus gives him 2. He says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important, though, he says. Love your neighbor as yourself. Apparently, these 2 commandments are so closely tied together that to simply give this man one commandment wouldn't have been a sufficient answer to his question. That's the way I read this, because he asks him for one single commandment, and Jesus says, no. I can't give you just one. Here's the one. But I also have to give you the second one because it's so equally, he said a second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Again, this goes back to what we were just talking about, that when we fall madly in love with Jesus, our hearts are changed, right? When I'm not at the center of the universe and God is there and I'm investing, my identity is in my relationship with Him, and I'm investing in this relationship and the intimacy that I'm developing with God, it changes me. It changes me, and I don't have to muster up the strength to be something that I'm not by doing all of these spiritual things. It changes me, and I am this way because I've been in the presence of God. And my life is no longer defined by me, it's defined by God. And His heart begins to become my heart. When we fall madly in love with Jesus, our hearts are changed. And when we grow in intimacy with God, our hearts are affected by it. And the things that matter to God begin to matter to me. They begin to matter to us. What's important to Him becomes important to me. Listen to the words of 1 John chapter 4 and verse 19. It says this: we love because He first loved us. The whole reason we can even love is because He first loved us. Stop and think about that for a second. When we experience the love that God has for us in intimate relationship with Him, that in and of itself is what gives us the ability to love. He says we love because He first loved us. He goes on then in verses 20 and 21, and he says, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And He has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. In John chapter 13, 34 and 35, Jesus says this. He says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. This love that God has for us, and this love that's supposed to change us and cause us to be able to love God in return and to love others, is the thing that defines us as Christians, as Christ followers. When this love grabs hold of our heart and it changes us, we look different and we act different and we talk different. When we love Jesus with everything we are, it changes us and we gain the heart of God. And it doesn't take long before His mission takes hold in our hearts and we begin caring about the things He cares about and loving others. See, Jesus doesn't just want to change our lives. He wants to change the world. It's huge. Because when it's not about you anymore, you get this. Because it's very easy for me to come to God and put myself at the center of the universe and say, God, change me so I can be super Christian. It's not what it's about. Jesus doesn't want to just change your life. He wants to change the world.